Welcome to part 2 of AASB's Virtual Summer Law Clinic webinar series. I'm Susan Salter, Director of Leadership Development for the Association and host of this session. Before we start, I have a couple of housekeeping items to remind you of. First of all, you may want to disable your screensaver on your computer during this session so it doesn't time out and knock you off the presentation. At this time, we have muted all lines, but if time permits at the end, you'll be able to type questions into the chat box for our presenter. And just a reminder, this session will be recorded. As you know, this is a 4-part webinar series, and so school board members will receive an hour of training credit for each one of the webinars in the series that you participate in. These hours can help you fulfill the state training requirements for the year, but to receive credit, remember that you must sign in on the sign-in sheet that we emailed to you already. The deadline for turning that sign-in sheet back into us is next Wednesday, June 17th. And if you don't have the sign-in sheet at this time, please send an email to membership@alabamaschoolboards.org. That's membership@alabamaschoolboards.org. If you have any trouble during this call or while you're viewing the presentation, you'll need to call the customer service number at 855-352-9002, and you'll need the webinar ID handy that was sent to you in the reminder email about this webinar. Again, that customer service number is 855-352-9002. And at the end of this session, we're going to have an attendance prize, but you have to be on the webinar to win. So you'll definitely want to stick around until we're finished. So now let's get started with our presentation. Our leader today is Teresa Petelos. She is a former circuit judge, as well as a shareholder in Boardman, Carr, Petelos, Watkins, and Ogle PC, and obviously a school board attorney. During this session today, Teresa will be exploring politics on campus and how you can balance free speech and political expression in what is clearly an increasingly polarized environment. Teresa, they're all yours.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all for being here. These are some crazy tough times that we've been having in our community and in our country. If you have, if you're up for election this time and have a runoff, I know this has to have been the longest period of time waiting for that election day. Hopefully, things are going to get back to normal in our country soon, and we'll be back all on the beach learning together before long. As she told you, I was a circuit judge for 18 years. I was reelected 3 times here in Jefferson County, and my husband was elected 3 times to the Alabama legislature and twice as the mayor of Hoover. I tell you all that so that you will understand that we have a little bit of experience running elections and serving as public officials. So give you a little bit of assurance that this 45 minutes is not completely wasted. I've been with the firm of Boardman Carr for the last 7 years, and we represent school board superintendents and board members. This subject, politics on campus, obviously, we're not talking about who's running for class president. We're talking about our school boards, and they serve such an important role in the state. And we appreciate each of you offering yourselves up and serving. Public service is not always easy, but I've always found it to be very rewarding, and I hope that you can say the same. What the things I want to cover today are things that hopefully you'll find useful during your election, and also things that will keep you from being the lead story on the 6 o'clock news. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about political issues and politics on campus. There are a lot of technical issues that if you're serving, running as office or serving now, that you need to be aware of. You have to comply with the qualifying and filing requirements of your political party. Obviously, those things have already been done since we had the primary. There's certain state election laws that you need to be aware of and make sure that you're in compliance with all of those. Your party, when you qualified, probably gave you all the information you need to know about making sure that you're in compliance with those requirements, but take them very seriously and look at them very carefully. Also, there are campaign financial disclosure requirements that you have to comply with. If you're running for a state office, you usually file those things with the Secretary of State. If you're running for a county office, which you are, you'd be filing those with the probate court. I highly suspect that you don't have people tripping over themselves to write big checks for school board elections. And I hate that because that's a very important election. People don't seem to always appreciate that you're directing the children, making sure that the children are getting a good education, and absolutely they're the future of our country. One other thing that I want to make you very aware of is make sure that you're in compliance with the Alabama ethics law. The Alabama Ethics Board has a lovely little green booklet, and I would encourage each of you to get one of those and try to look over it. It's actually very user-friendly. A lot of things you'll find don't really apply to you, but there are a number of things in it that are very important. I've a number of times had to represent people before the ethics committee, and it's pretty scary. An investigator shows up with a badge at your office and starts an investigation. So you want to make sure that you stay in compliance with the ethics law. We'll cover a little bit more of that in just a moment. When you're running your campaign, I don't know if you're going to have literature, cards, signs, if you're going to use social media, grassroots like door to door, and how much fundraising you will have. No matter what type of literature that you're using, or if you're sending out fundraising letters, there's a requirement to have a campaign disclosure on those. So be aware of that. That is to provide transparency to elections, so that if smear pieces go out, somebody is, they'll know that it didn't come from your campaign. It's always important the way that you conduct your campaign. It not only affects you as a candidate, but it affects the administrators, the superintendents, the teachers, the students and parents, and even your community leaders and other elected officials. For instance, if you're running a campaign, if you get in some sort of open discourse with your legislator, you may need that legislator at some point down the road to introduce some bill that would be required for some funding issue for your schools. So run your campaign with an eye towards serving. Remember that you don't want to burn bridges because you may have to cross back over those. Another fairly new phenomenon, I suppose it's not that new anymore, but it changes all the time, is social media. Social media provides an excellent tool during an election to let you share your message. And once you're elected, to stay in touch with your community and constituents. However, you need to be very cautious about what you post. Social media is changing all the time. There's a new platform, and if you're campaigning, you may be on several different platforms because different people use different platforms. We'll talk a little bit more about social media in just a minute. When you're delivering your message, you want to deliver a message, like I said, that you can be proud of, that you're not going to regret later on. Is it a divisive message or a unifying message? Something that you need to consider sooner rather than later. As a school board member, you can achieve great things for the next generation of young people, and just keep that in mind, that your goal is to look out for the children. So remember that when you're developing the message. Many times when someone is spurred to run for office, it's because of some controversial decision that was made by a previous board or a previous board member. And if you're going to have a message that you want to disseminate, and perhaps it might be unpopular or controversial, surround yourself with some trusted advisors, develop what your message is going to be, stay on message, and always make sure that if you have questions, whether something is something you should do or shouldn't do, legal, illegal, ethical, unethical, contact your local party, your political party, contact your, you can send a question to the Alabama Ethics Commission. There are a lot of resources. So if you have any question whether you should use something, think about it long and hard. There's a little lighthearted slide that I loved. If you've ever run for political office, you can certainly appreciate this. Thank you, political campaign mailers, for making handy throwaway dustpans that help clean up cat vomit and dead bugs. So we all get swamped with junk mail at election time. If you've ever had campaign signs, they also make great sleds when it snows, on rare occasion here in Alabama. So people are inundated at election time with information. You have to make your information stand out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, what I want to talk about is that about current employees that are employees in your school system running. They absolutely have a right to run for school board, and it is not necessary that they resign or take a leave of absence to run. Or you, if you're that person who's a school employee running for office. However, you need to be aware that you cannot campaign or engage in political activities during normal working hours. If the candidate is employed by a city council or county commission, for some reason, state law does require that they use vacation time or take an unpaid leave of absence. Another important issue is campaigning during work hours. A candidate may engage in campaign activity during work hours as long as they have approved leave time by their supervisor, and you have to use approved leave or vacation leave. Another thing that's really important to know if you're running, and this is all in your handout, but you cannot use your copier or computer at the central office for any campaign purpose. Campaign pictures, ads, videos can be done on common areas or public areas of public buildings. You can have a press conference at the school, provided that access to those areas is available to all candidates on an equal basis and that it does not disrupt normal business. Offices that are not open to the public should not be used to film campaign ads or for photographs. For instance, if the school board superintendent wants to sit in his office behind his pretty wooden desk with the US flag and the Alabama flag, that's not acceptable because that's not a public space that everyone has access to. Another question is about bumper stickers. Bumper stickers should not be placed on publicly owned vehicles. That seems like that would be something that everybody would think would know, but just be sure. Bumper stickers can be placed on your private vehicle, even if the board reimburses that official for mileage. School employees, as far as wearing campaign buttons, t-shirts, they are allowed to do that as long as it does not disrupt the workplace. Oftentimes, They have found that to be disruptive in the workplace, so that may not be something that you want to encourage. This is an important thing, and that you always remember that you cannot use the school mail, or what's more oftentimes a problem is the school email may not be used to distribute campaign materials. If someone has sent something to you, you can't forward that on your school email. You need to be very careful about that. Also, campaign materials can't be placed on the bulletin board, the walls of the lawns, school lawns. Facilities such as the gym may be used for political activity as long as every other political and non-political outside group is allowed to use the facility. Because of that rule, I would say that you are likely going to be turned down to use the facility because they do not know what the next group may be that steps forward and wants to use it. So in an effort to not create problems down the road, very likely you will not be given the opportunity to use that. Incumbents and non-incumbents both can pass out campaign literature as long as all candidates can distribute literature on public property. That's very often at perhaps a sporting event. That's a little different this year since we're not having any sporting events, but you may have some in the fall before November. I don't know yet, but none of us know. But you can hand it out at a football game, some sort of school function. So hopefully that will be an issue that everybody will be back in school, and that's something that we can hope for. We've got our guy here that says, "Show me the money." You need to always be aware of the financial issues in a campaign. They can get very sticky if you don't keep yourself informed and use extremely good judgment. I think it should go without saying, but that a board may not endorse a candidate or make a financial contribution to a candidate. However, board members may contribute to political campaigns, endorse candidates, and participate in political activities as long as they do not attempt to influence or coerce board employees to support a specific candidate. So you can endorse, as a sitting board member, you can endorse other people. The question is, do you want to do that? If your person prevails, that's great. If your person doesn't prevail, you're going to be serving on the board. I've generally decided that I'll keep my nose in my own campaign, and that advice may serve you well. I'm not going to dwell on this because I don't know who it would affect, but under Alabama state law, a person cannot hold two offices of profit at the same time. If you are already a government employee, you need to check and make sure that you're in compliance with that state law that you cannot hold two offices of profit. I think I touched earlier on always use the proper disclaimer on your literature. That's very important. That's what "show me the bug" means. Is we call that a little bug that you put on the bottom of your campaign disclosure. The other thing is to make sure that you do timely file your financial disclosure forms as required by Alabama law. All right, the next subject that we want to cover is social media. Our slide says, nothing shows maturity better than a good public fight on the internet. Oh, look, they turned on the caps lock. This is serious now. Social media, as we said earlier, can be a great tool for you, especially if you have a lower budget campaign, which is likely the the status that most of you are in, you have to be very careful. You have to ask yourself, is this a personal or a public forum? And you obviously can't make promises about what you would do via social media. Think twice about criticism or taking on volatile, controversial topics. Obviously, I think you should memorize this. Ponder before you post. Once you've put something on social media, it's out there. You can't get it back. Even if it's going to someone that you didn't know that it was going to, they can screenshot it. They can forward it to someone else. So you must be extremely careful about what you post on social media. I would advise you to, if you already have, for instance, a personal Facebook page, create a separate Facebook page for your campaign. And that gives you a little bit of distance in that you know that you're not putting something on your personal page. And always, when you're putting it on your public page, your campaign page, you'll be aware of that. However, even if you're putting something on your personal page, that can be controversial. So you need to be really careful about that. Never post anything on social media that you don't want to see on a billboard, on the evening news, because all of that can become public. Some of the social media platforms that people use now are Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, Reddit. Here on our slide, the guy says, you're fine. It's not you. It's your social media behavior. And it is interesting the way that social media behavior can change someone's personality. The person who is calm, quiet, never creates a problem, there's something about that invisible status that social media gives you, and you type and hit send in a heartbeat, but you would never say that to someone's face. The problem is you're not anonymous, and it's not just going to one person, it's going to many, many, many people. So you need to keep that foremost in your mind at all times. If you decide that you want to use some of these social media platforms and you're not well versed in them, call your kids, call your grandkids. The young people are much better at this. But if you don't know how to use it, find someone that does, because you can get yourself in trouble trying to use a social media platform that you're not familiar with. Some of the buzzwords are that you follow someone, share a post, you tweet, you retweet, you join groups, you send something, you post it, you tag something, or you get tagged in something. So you have to be always aware. If you have on a shirt, for instance, a t-shirt that is something that someone else might find offensive, someone else might be insulted by it. If somebody has a picture of you wearing that shirt, they can tag you in that picture, re-tag you, they can share it. So those are things that if you're going to be running for public office or serving, some of you may be on appointed school boards, but if you're serving on a school board, you are going to be under a higher degree of scrutiny, and you just really have to always remember that. As we said before, it'd be a hard pill to swallow, so don't do anything online that you do not want on a billboard plastered on your face, with your face. Eric Qualman said, we don't have a choice on whether we do social media. The question is, how well do we do it? like I said, if you're going to use it, make sure that you know how to use the platform that you've chosen. I want to talk a little bit more about ethics. There are some things that the ethics law covers that you might be surprised to know. When you're elected, you'll be required to watch a video and log in that you watch that video. I would encourage you to pay very close attention to that video because it can save you from having your face plastered on a billboard. The ethics law is very strong in Alabama. If you violate it and someone files a complaint, there can be an investigation. And you can, if the ethics committee finds that there was a violation, they'll forward it to the district attorney in your county for prosecution. So you really want to be careful and take that very seriously. One case that I represented a client on before the ethics commission, from the time that you're elected on election day until you take office, Alabama ethics law says a public official elected, whether or not that person has taken office, is subject to the ethics law. So the person that I represented, they were elected, but they did not think that the ethics law applied to them until they took office. So that is something that's very important that you realize. Also, you can't have someone else, a family member, do something on your behalf that you could not do. So because you don't do it personally, if it's something that you stand to gain from, that could be a violation of the ethics law. If you're elected, you will be required every year to file what's called a statement of economic interest. That has to be filed by April 30th of every year. And that's very important. Some of you who have been school board members for a while have probably filled one of these out. And it's very cumbersome. It asks a lot of questions, and you think, why is it asking me all these questions? The reason for that is that there needs to be full disclosure, because as a school board member, you're going to be, as are all elected officials, voting on a lot of expenditures of public funds. Just for example, it'll ask you, who are your siblings? Where do they work? And your question is, who cares? Why do y'all care? I'll just give you a personal example. My brother owns an electrical company, and for many years he had maintained the ball fields in the city of Hoover. And when my husband was elected mayor, there are all kinds of disclosures and things you can do. But my brother opted not to keep doing that work because he didn't want there to appear to be a conflict of interest. And that would be a conflict of interest if it were not disclosed properly. It asks you about your brothers. What if your brother is owns some land next to something the school system needs to buy? That statement of economic interest is there, and you have disclosed through that statement of economic interest that who your brother is. So it's just important. If your sister works at a bank and there's a vote on whether to finance bonds, get a loan, do the board banking, any financial decisions that bank could be involved in, the statement of economic interest has made the public aware that you have a relative that works there. So getting that form filed on April 30th of every year is important. Make sure that you do that. when you're on the board, you need to be aware of recusals and abstaining. That's very important. And if you don't recuse from something where one of your family members, or you, of course, personally, or your family members stands to have some financial gain, then that's a violation of ethics law. Let's say, and this is often the case, especially in your smaller counties, but your cousin works in the lunchroom at a certain school, and you, well, let's say your daughter works in the lunchroom at a certain school, and you vote to give all lunchroom workers a raise. You need to recuse yourself from that because, as a family member, they stand to gain financially from that. The difference in abstaining and recusal is if you're part of the discussion, but you abstain from the vote, the final vote, then that's where abstaining is. Recusal is you completely remove yourself from any discussion or the vote on the matter. And if you have an issue that you're going to recuse from, if you are the board president or the vice president conducting that meeting, you need to pass the gavel while that discussion is going on and when that vote is taken, and then the gavel can be passed back to you. But you need to be very careful that that you don't vote. Not only do you not vote, but you recuse yourself if there's some financial gain. All right, the next subject that we want to talk about is the First Amendment. Obviously, we're all familiar with that. The unfortunate incident in the last few weeks has, I guess, made the First Amendment come to light more than we've thought about it probably in quite some time. The First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. One of the primary questions that you have to ask yourself when it comes to First Amendment issues on campus is the balancing question is, does all government's interest in limiting public speech outweigh the employee's First Amendment rights? A political candidate or board member absolutely has a right to their opinion and to express their opinion. The question is, do I want to exercise that right? And that balancing test is something that you would want to ask yourself when making that decision. There are a number of volatile, controversial, and emotional topics that can create a firestorm for the board member, the board at large, superintendent, the school district, principals, and teachers. Some of this goes back to the social media that we talked about a moment ago, because that's where a number of people today exercise their First Amendment rights of free speech is through the internet. When you're engaging using your First Amendment rights for free speech, that includes posting, liking, following, sharing, sending, tweeting, tagging, etc. Exercise caution when you're making highly inflammatory posts. Public employees, such as school teachers, enjoy First Amendment rights just as all Americans. However, that right is not absolute and unlimited. Again, the balancing question is, does the government's interest in limiting free speech outweigh the employee's First Amendment rights? When posts have a negative impact, the in the employee's ability to do their job as it relates to coworkers, parents, or students. The school systems have been fairly successful in disciplining employees. So as a board member, you're going to be called upon to deal with issues where teachers have perhaps exercised their First Amendment rights. So I would urge you to use caution in your posting and what you say, what you do, what you have the right. Again, the question is, do you really want to use that right? The courts have held that you can exercise your First Amendment rights, but you may not use the school district resources for electioneering or political advocacy. The bottom line is that the laws advance the compelling interest of preserving the use of public funds for the public rather than private purposes. The First Amendment speech is not protected speech when it comes to voting. You have to vote in public. The vote as a school board member must be done in public, and that's very important. Also, private deliberations among officials about public business is not protected speech. Those deliberations should take place in the meeting. You're probably all familiar with the open meetings law, and open meetings law extends not only to board meetings, but group chats, group text on the computer, Zoom meetings, conference calls, and Google meetings. If you're texting with a fellow board member, what time's the meeting start? Okay, that's good. If you have a group text, if you start discussing the agenda, deliberating, then that is not appropriate, and that violates the Open Meetings Act. So very important that you be aware of that. I want to thank all of you for your willingness to serve, putting yourself out there. It's important that good people run for public office and have a willingness to serve. Just be aware that with this public office, or being a public person, you have a extra scrutiny and that scrutiny can be very intense, but just be ready, prepare yourself for it. I think we have some time for some questions.
Thank you, Teresa. We appreciate the information. If you do have questions, if you'll use the chat box on your screen to type them in. As of this moment, no one has submitted one. So I'll go ahead and announce our attendance prize winner, and that'll give folks a second or two if they want to type in a question. So our attendance prize today is sponsored by our Platinum Professional Sustaining member, Lathan and Associates Architects, and we certainly appreciate their support of the association and our members. Our winner today is Dr. Tanya Miles of the Selma Board of Education. Tanya, you will receive a $25 Home Depot gift certificate, and we'll be getting that to you, and we hope you enjoy it. Looking at this point, Teresa, we do not have any questions. So at this point, I'll say thank you for your time and your participation. We hope that the information that's been provided to our attendees today is useful. Our next webinar that will be part of the series will be next Wednesday, June 17th. We hope you will join us for. Yes, ma'am.
I hate to interrupt. I do see several questions submitted. I can read those off.
Please do, because they're not showing on my screen. Sorry about that.
No, not a problem. Let me go ahead and okay, one question says, what about an employee using their school email account to send messages to elected officials about a political issue that is not related to education?
I would say that that would not be appropriate if it's not related to education. And there are very few people this day and time who don't have a personal email address. So I would say that would be problematic. I mean, um, anybody else had any experience with that? Or
I don't think so at this point.
Okay, if she responds, then I will go back and read it out to you. I will go to the next question. It says, currently we are dealing with systematic racism in the US and bring more awareness to it via protest. How do you feel about board members supporting the Black Lives Matter movement via social media? If you are opposed to them speaking out on social media, how do you suggest they speak up on this topic?
oh, that's a good controversial issue. I think that that is obviously a growing, expanding issue every day. I think you have to be especially careful not to use obviously not to use your school board email address or any platform for that. I think that you can speak out on an issue that you feel passionate about. I think that though it has to be respectful, and you have to expect there are going to be people who have differences of opinion with you. And the thing that you want to do as a school board member is to conduct yourself with the dignity and the grace that is that your office deserves. That, and remember that you are a school board member, that you children are at the heart of your service, and it's very easy. I mean, I've experienced myself over the last couple of weeks. I have type, and then hit the delete button, and because there's things I see that make me, angry and upset, and I want to, but I think better of it. So, but if there's something that you feel very passionate about, certainly express your opinions. Know before you hit the send button. As I said, ponder before you post. But you have your First Amendment rights to your opinion. Because you serve doesn't stop you from having an opinion, obviously. But just be respectful and know that somebody's not going to be happy with it. Just don't let them goad you into behavior that you wouldn't be proud of later.
Okay, the next question says, did I understand correctly that a board member must recuse oneself in the case of a pay raise where their relative is an employee that will benefit financially, such as a CNP or locally funded teacher raise?
It depends on the degree of kinship. I mean, obviously, if it's your spouse or a child that lives in your home, but yes, that can be problematic if it's some way, if you're going to benefit financially from it. If you ever have a question, um, the Alabama Ethics Commission they have opinions, and there are so many questions that have already been asked. And I would encourage you to look at those opinions on their website. And there's what do you call it? I guess like an index of the subject matter, because people have asked about, pay raises, cars, and relatives, and property, and things that you couldn't even imagine other people have thought of. So if there's a question and to the degree of kinship, I would say yes, that you need to recuse if it's going to be some way that you're going to benefit financially.
Shalicia,
I guess oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was going to ask Shalicia, did that complete our questions? But Teresa, did you have something else to add?
Well, just always consider better safe than sorry, I think is the problem, because I have represented someone before the Ethics Commission that, like a department got a raise, the whole department, but they had someone that worked in that department. So someone filed a complaint, and they did the investigation. And so better safe than sorry. Look on the Ethics Commission website, and you'd be hard pressed to come up with a question that hasn't been thought of before.
All right, I think that completes our questions. Again, thank you for your time. Just a reminder that next week's third installment in the virtual law clinic series will be on the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Family Medical Leave Act issues. Broadly, but also as they relate to this time of COVID. So we hope you will join us for that.